TIFU by getting my girlfriend's brother arrested at my own surprise party. I've always been a pretty laid-back guy when it comes to my relationships. My girlfriend, Jessie, and I had been together for over a year, and things were going smoothly. Her family is, well, let's say they're a lot. They're the type that believes in showing affection in loud, boisterous ways and making every event feel like a mini festival. In contrast, my own family is calm, quiet, and reserved. So when Jessie suggested we combine our two families for a surprise birthday party for me, I was hesitant. But hey, she's my girlfriend. I wanted to make her happy, so I reluctantly agreed. She promised it would be low-key, just a few close friends and family members. Little did I know, low-key meant 20 of her closest relatives crammed into my apartment with enough food and booze to feed an army. The day of the party rolled around, and I tried to prepare myself mentally for what was about to go down. Jessie assured me everything was under control. Still, I couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Jessie's brother, Kyle, was coming, and while I liked him well enough, he had a reputation. He was charming, sure, but he was also one of those guys who would make a joke 1 second and then act like you didn't exist the next. He had a knack for always being the life of the party, but at times he could be a bit much. I'd seen him get a little rowdy at family gatherings before, so I hoped that wouldn't happen tonight. But my gut told me otherwise. When I walked into my apartment that evening, the first thing I noticed was the smell of greasy food and the sound of music blasting from my speakers. Jessie had, of course, managed to somehow turn my quiet living room into what felt like a concert venue. People were already mingling, some chatting, others dancing like they were at a nightclub. I wasn't exactly thrilled, but I smiled and waved at everyone. It was my birthday after all. As I tried to get comfortable, I noticed Jessie's mom in the kitchen, busy preparing more food. Jessie was running around talking to everyone, and Kyle was nowhere to be seen. At first, I was relieved, but then I spotted him in the corner of the room, huddled with a group of people. I knew what that meant. Kyle was already stirring up trouble. It started innocently enough. A few jokes here and there. He was the life of the party, like always. But the more he drank, the more I began to notice that he was becoming a little too animated. I could tell he was getting on some people's nerves, but nobody wanted to say anything. I was talking to one of my friends when I heard raised voices coming from the living room. I turned around to see Kyle laughing hysterically, standing way too close to one of the guests. The guy, Steve, who I didn't know well but knew enough to know he was a bit of a hothead, looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Hey, man, back off a little," Steve said, his face flushed. Kyle, of course, didn't take that too kindly. "What? You scared, bro?" he slurred, clearly drunk. "I'm just having a little fun." Steve didn't look like he was in the mood for fun. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could see things were about to escalate. I quickly stepped in, trying to defuse the situation. "Hey, Kyle, why don't you grab a drink and chill for a second?" I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. But Kyle, who had clearly had more than enough to drink by this point, shrugged me off. "Nah, man, I'm good," he said, leaning towards Steve. "You think you can talk to me like that? I'm the life of the party. Everyone loves me." I felt a knot form in my stomach. This was exactly what I had been worried about. I tried to step in again, but before I could say anything, Kyle shoved Steve lightly, which only made Steve's temper flare up even more. Before anyone could react, Steve swung a punch at Kyle. It wasn't a huge punch, but it was enough to get the ball rolling. Kyle staggered back, holding his nose. He looked furious, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face Steve. "You're gonna regret that," Kyle spat. And just like that, things escalated from bad to worse. The next few minutes felt like a blur. People started shouting, and it quickly became clear that Kyle wasn't going to back down. I could hear him yelling at Steve, but then, in a shocking turn of events, Kyle charged at him. It wasn't a brawl, but it was chaos. The music kept playing in the background, completely out of place as I frantically tried to stop the fight from getting any worse. And then the police showed up. I still don't know exactly how they got called. Maybe someone in the building heard the commotion. Maybe someone in the crowd decided to make a phone call. But suddenly, 2 officers were standing in my doorway, looking confused and annoyed. One of them looked at me and asked, "What's going on here?" I didn't even know where to start. "It's a party, there was a fight." I was trying to explain, but it didn't matter. The second officer walked right over to Kyle, who was standing near the corner of the room, still ranting. "We got a call about a fight," the officer said. "You involved in this?" Kyle, in his drunken state, didn't even seem fazed. "Yeah, I'm involved. That guy," he pointed at Steve, who was sulking by the window. "He punched me first." "But I'm the one getting arrested?" The officer raised an eyebrow. "You're under arrest for disturbing the peace and assault," he said. Kyle, still too drunk to process what was happening, started arguing with the officers. "What? You can't arrest me. I'm the one who got punched." I swear, this was like a bad comedy. People were looking at me like I had somehow invited this chaos into my life. I couldn't believe this was happening at my own birthday party. It didn't take long for the situation to spiral completely out of control. Kyle kept yelling and resisting the officers, and eventually, they had to physically restrain him and drag him out of my apartment. He was kicking and screaming the entire time, and I just stood there, completely mortified. The party ended on the spot. People began trickling out, some of them leaving quietly, while others were still talking about the incident. I was left in stunned silence, trying to piece together what had just happened. Jessie was furious, of course. She blamed me for not keeping an eye on Kyle. She didn't get why I hadn't done more to stop him from getting arrested. Honestly, I was just as shocked as she was. As it turns out, Kyle spent the night in jail. He was released the next morning, but I didn't hear the end of it from Jessie's family. They were all deeply upset about the arrest, and every family gathering after that was awkward. Jessie wasn't speaking to me for a week, and I had to do some serious damage control. Now, whenever we have family get-togethers, Kyle somehow finds a way to bring up the party in the most obnoxious way possible, and I swear, it's like everyone in her family just won't let me forget that I was the one who invited the chaos into my life. So, yeah, that's how I managed to get my girlfriend's brother arrested at my own surprise party. Worst birthday ever. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by pretending to be Australian for 6 years and forgetting I wasn't. This didn't happen today. This has been unraveling slowly and painfully for the last few months. It all started as a joke, one that got wildly, ridiculously out of hand. Strap in, because this is the story of how I accidentally convinced an entire group of people that I was Australian, and how it came crashing down in the most public and humiliating way possible. Back in 2018, I started working for a new company, remote gig, mostly international staff. At the time, we were onboarding through a Zoom-like call, just a few of us on the call, and a pretty laid-back vibe. I had just come back from visiting a friend in Melbourne and was still doing a terrible impression of an Aussie accent for fun. I don't know what came over me, but when they asked me to introduce myself, I did it in that dumb fake Australian accent. People laughed, someone asked where I was from, and instead of just backing down and admitting I was kidding, I panicked and said Brisbane. It should have stopped there. It should have been a 10-second joke. But someone else on the team was also Australian, from Adelaide, and I guess they were just thrilled to hear another Aussie voice. They instantly started asking where I grew up, what school I went to, and if I followed the Lions. I was in too deep. My brain short-circuited, and I committed. I became Aussie Matt. Now, keep in mind, this is remote work. We communicate mostly over Slack and video calls, and a lot of the team is spread across the globe. It didn't seem like that big of a deal. I thought I'll just do the voice during meetings and let it fade out eventually. But I didn't account for just how good the team was at bonding, and how long I'd end up working there. Over the years, I watched YouTube videos to perfect my accent. I joined Aussie Reddit threads, learned slang, researched suburbs, memorized footy stats. I was living a double life. My girlfriend thought it was hilarious. My friends knew about it and occasionally asked me to go full Brisbane at parties. I even Skyped into one of our company happy hours wearing a Wallabies jersey while eating Vegemite toast. I kept it up for 6 years. 6 years. During that time, our company grew, I got promoted, and I became pretty well liked. I mentored junior staff, helped with onboarding, and got put in charge of organizing this year's in-person company retreat, our first ever. That's where this all goes downhill. The retreat was in Vancouver. The idea was to bring the whole company together for team building, workshops, and social stuff. I was nervous, but figured I could keep the accent up for a week. No big deal. First day, I meet everyone in person and no red flags. I do the accent, crack a few jokes about Tim Tams, and all seems fine. The Adelaide guy is there too, and he introduces me to someone else as my Brisbane brother. We drink beers and bond over how no one back home can handle the cold. I am dying inside. Second day, minor slip. We're doing an icebreaker activity and I accidentally say soda instead of soft drink. A woman from Sydney tilts her head and asks, "Soda? You mean soft drink?" I cover by saying I spent a few years in the US. She nods. Crisis averted. Barely. Third day, full collapse. We had a trivia night. One of the categories was Australian pop culture. I thought I was safe. I'd studied for this. But I didn't account for how specific some of the questions would be. One question was about a classic children's show called Round the Twist. I blinked. Literally had no idea. Everyone at the table turned to me like I was their secret weapon. I tried to laugh it off, but my face was white. Another question, what's the second verse of the Australian national anthem? I got it wrong. The Adelaide guy looked at me like I just betrayed his entire bloodline. But the real killer? At the end of the night, the MC asked if the 2 Aussies in the room could come up and do a quick impromptu sing-along of Land Down Under. I tried to bow out, but the crowd was chanting and cheering. So there I was, standing next to Adelaide Dave, about to belt out a song I've only ever heard drunk at barbecues, trying to lip-sync my way through lyrics I didn't know, with an accent that was rapidly unraveling. After the song, Dave pulls me aside. "Mate," he says, "where in Brisbane did you say you were from again?" I mumble something about New Farm. He raises an eyebrow. "What school?" I make one up. He stares at me for a second and says, "Never heard of it." Then walks away. I thought maybe I could recover, but the next morning I woke up to about 10 DMs from coworkers asking if I was okay, if I was sick, and if my voice was different. I realized the jig was up. At breakfast, Dave stood up in front of the entire team and said, "I just want to give a shout out to Matt for his Oscar-worthy performance these past 6 years." It was over. People laughed. Some were confused. A few were pissed. I had to come clean in front of everyone and explain the whole thing. Some people thought it was hilarious. Others felt betrayed. HR had a very long talk with me. My boss called it the weirdest professional misconduct issue she'd ever dealt with. They didn't fire me, but they did demote me. I'm no longer in charge of onboarding or public-facing anything. I'm just quietly coding again in a dark corner of Slack, now with my real voice. Nobody calls me Aussie Matt anymore. I'm just Matt. This happened a few weeks ago, and I'm only now able to look at myself in the mirror without cringing so hard I feel my spine dislocate. My best friend, Matt, got married. I was the best man. We've been best friends since 3rd grade. He once broke his arm because I dared him to jump off his roof using a plastic bag as a parachute, so I'd say our friendship is sealed in blood and dumbassery. The wedding was in this beautiful old estate just outside our hometown. Rustic wooden arches, wildflowers, string lights, the works. Pinterest would have cried tears of joy if it had eyes. I had 2 jobs. Give the best man speech and don't screw anything up. I practiced that speech like it was the monologue that would get me an Oscar, and I was determined to not mess up the second part. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Vows were said, tears were shed, and Matt looked like the happiest man alive. We got through the group photos, cocktail hour, and finally made it to the reception. That's where things went sideways. Here's the thing. I have a weird dietary quirk. I'm not allergic to anything but mayonnaise. My body treats it like a hostile invader. I've projectile vomited from a single bite of a tuna sandwich. I don't know if it's psychological, biological, or a curse from an ancient condiment god, but mayo and I do not coexist. So we're about an hour into the reception. Everyone's milling around, sipping drinks, and the servers are bringing out these trays of fancy mini sandwiches. Tiny things like sliders made for ants. I grab one, take a bite, and instantly my mouth is flooded with betrayal.
Mayo.
Not a lot, but enough. I feel my stomach clench, like it's trying to turn itself inside out. I bolt for the bathroom, but the layout of this old-ass estate is confusing as hell, and instead of finding a toilet, I find myself in what I think is a coat room. There's a table in there, some mirrors, and, for reasons I still don't understand, a very large floral arrangement. I drop to my knees in front of the table and just let it rip. All of it. The sandwich, the 3 gin and tonics, the mini crab cake I had an hour ago. I'm horrified and disgusted, but also relieved. I do my best to clean up. There are tissues and some decorative hand towels, I know, and I figure I'll confess to staff later. I stumble back to the reception just as they're introducing the bridal party for the big entrance. And that's when I notice something. Everyone's looking toward the double doors. And those doors? The ones opening in slow motion to reveal the bride and groom? Those are the same damn doors I just came through. The room goes dead silent. Matt's bride, Jenna, is staring at me. The photographer has his camera halfway up. I glance behind me and see, oh God, the vomit. On the table. The cake table. Turns out I hadn't found a random coat room. I had found the cake room, where the $900 custom 3-tier wedding cake had been waiting for its grand entrance. Or had been. Because I had, in my disoriented panic, vomited all over the lower 2 tiers. There is no elegant way to describe the chaos that followed. Someone screamed. I think it was Jenna's mom. The planner sprinted toward the cake, like she could somehow fix it. Matt just stood there, eyes wide, like he'd just witnessed a war crime. And me? I did what any self-respecting best man would do. I panicked and tried to say it was a surprise performance art piece. It was not convincing. Eventually, I was escorted out, not quite kicked out, but definitely encouraged to take a breather. Matt came out to talk to me a little later. He wasn't mad. I think he wanted to be, but we've been through so much dumb stuff together that he just sighed and said, "Of course it was you." Then he laughed. A little. That's when I knew our friendship would survive. The staff managed to salvage the top tier of the cake. They served that, along with a backup sheet cake from the kitchen. The bride didn't speak to me the rest of the night. She's still not speaking to me. I wrote her a very sincere letter of apology and offered to pay for a new cake. But yeah, not sure that one's going to heal quickly. So now, every time someone brings up that wedding, I get to relive the shame of being the guy who puked on the wedding cake. All because I didn't check a sandwich for mayonnaise. I am legend. I am cautionary tale. I am the guy who upstaged the bride with a bodily function. TIFU by joining a Zoom meeting while sleep-deprived and ruining a 6-figure contract. So for context, I work in business development for a mid-sized software company. Not tech support, not a coder, just the guy who talks to potential clients, listens to their needs, and then tells them we can make their dreams come true with only moderate exaggeration. I've been doing this for a few years and I'm decent at it, but last week I made a mistake that will haunt me every time I open Zoom for the rest of my life. It all started because my neighbor's house was undergoing renovations and their contractors decided 6 a.m. was a reasonable time to start jackhammering their driveway. Combine that with the fact that I was up late watching a documentary about North Korean labor camps. Why? No clue, and I ended up getting maybe 3 hours of fragmented, angry sleep. But I had a big pitch meeting the next day with a European client, and due to time zones, it was scheduled for 7:30 a.m. So I rolled out of bed, threw on a wrinkled button-down shirt, no pants, obviously, made a coffee so strong it could give a corpse anxiety, and joined the call from my desk, camera off, mic muted. Now, in our company we have this policy of soft join, where everyone gets in the Zoom call and kind of chills silently for a minute or two before we officially start. So while everyone was logging on, I leaned back in my chair to close my eyes for what I thought was going to be 30 seconds. I woke up 42 minutes later. In the time it took me to drool all over my shirt and descend into a state of limp unconsciousness, the meeting had gone very much ahead without me. My webcam was still off, praise be, but here's where I really screwed up. My mic had apparently been on the entire time. My wired headset has this temperamental little button on the cord that can unmute with the slightest bump. I must have hit it as I leaned back, because according to multiple Slack messages from my boss, I had been softly snoring into a live meeting with 8 people, including the CEO of a major logistics company from Berlin. But wait, it gets worse. At one point, apparently, I mumbled something in my sleep. Not just a soft murmur, not a vague noise, no, I said something. I said, and I quote because my boss recorded the meeting for training purposes. "Yeah, you like that spreadsheet? Take it, you dirty CSV." Dead silence. Then someone coughed. And then I snored again. So now there's 8 people in a meeting, including my boss, 2 senior engineers, our director of sales, and a European CEO whose company is worth more than my hometown, sitting in stunned silence as I dirty talk an Excel file in my sleep like I'm auditioning for a role in 50 Shades of Microsoft Office. By the time I jolted awake, hair matted to the side of my face, shirt soaked in drool, I had 5 messages from my boss ranging from, "Hey, are you okay?" to "Dude, mute yourself," to "What the actual F***?" I also had 3 missed calls and a DM from the sales director that just said, "We'll talk later." I scrambled to unmute and tried to pretend like my mic had just glitched. I said, "Sorry, Zoom issue. Didn't realize I was connected." One of the German execs replied, "Ja, we heard everything." I swear I saw one of them trying not to laugh. The other one looked like he was preparing to file a restraining order. The meeting limped forward for another 10 minutes, during which I tried to contribute meaningfully, but I kept stumbling over my words and making it worse. At one point, I tried to make a joke to lighten the mood and said something like, "Well, at least now you know I dream about spreadsheets, right?" No one laughed, a literal void of sound. I could feel my soul start to evaporate through my skin. Needless to say, they didn't sign the contract. That was a $240,000 deal.
Gone. Just like that.
After the call, my boss didn't even yell. He just sighed and said, "We're going to need to be more present in meetings from now on." The kind of disappointed tone that hurts way more than shouting. Like when your dad says, "I'm not mad, just disappointed," but instead of a broken window, you're responsible for losing $250,000 in potential revenue because you seduced a spreadsheet in your sleep. To wrap this nightmare up, HR now includes Zoom etiquette refresher in every onboarding package, and our IT department has a new rule that mics and cameras default to off until manually activated. Oh, and my coworkers have fully embraced this moment as part of our team culture. My desk had a sticky note the next morning that said, "Hot Ford CSVS," and someone even changed my Slack profile pic to a spreadsheet with kissy lips photoshopped on it. I still work here. Somehow. But every time I log into Zoom, my body physically tenses like I'm about to get hit by a truck.
So yeah.
That's how I accidentally dirty talked a spreadsheet, snored for 40 minutes, and lost a 6-figure client. Stay awake, kids. And always double-check your mic. TIFU, by accidentally getting a complete stranger fired on my first day at a new job. I had just moved to a new city for a fresh start. After a few months of searching for work, I finally landed a position at a small marketing agency. The company had a good reputation, the people seemed nice, and I was genuinely excited to begin this new chapter in my life. The first day was all about orientation, getting to know the team, and setting up my workstation. It was mostly administrative stuff, and I was looking forward to getting into the actual work the next day. The office was located in a pretty busy part of the city, and when I walked in, there was a buzz of energy in the air. People were moving about, talking to each other in hushed tones, and working at their desks. I was introduced to a few people by the HR manager, who seemed friendly enough. Then, as I was walking towards my new desk, I was approached by a woman who introduced herself as Sarah. She was around my age, had a warm smile, and immediately gave me the impression that she was one of those people who would be easy to talk to. We chatted for a few minutes about the usual stuff, where we were from, what we like to do in our free time, etc. It was a comfortable conversation. She mentioned that she was in charge of social media and was handling the company's Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. I told her I had experience with social media marketing and that I had worked with a few brands in the past, mostly handling their social media content. She seemed impressed, and for a moment, I thought I had made a friend. She asked me if I had heard about the big project that was coming up, and I said I hadn't. She explained that the agency was working on an advertising campaign for a major client, and it was a pretty big deal for the company. Sarah was involved in creating some of the content for the campaign, and she seemed pretty passionate about it. Then, she mentioned something that immediately made me feel uneasy. "Well," she said with a little grin, "I've been handling the company's social media for a while now, but they still let me do whatever I want. Like, no one really checks my posts. Sometimes I post things that are a little controversial, just to keep things interesting." I laughed nervously, trying to be polite. "Yeah, I get that. It's always fun to push the envelope a little, right?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Exactly. Like last week I posted something that got a ton of likes and shares. It was a meme making fun of that one politician. People loved it, but I thought, well, if this goes too far, I might get in trouble. You know?" At this point, I was starting to feel uncomfortable, but I didn't want to seem judgmental on my first day. It didn't seem like a big deal, so I just nodded and smiled. The conversation ended shortly after that, and I went back to my desk to start setting up my computer. It was a long day of getting everything ready for the next day, and I didn't think much about the conversation with Sarah. Fast forward to a couple of weeks later. The marketing team had been working hard on the campaign for the big client, and I was starting to get more involved in some of the content creation. I noticed Sarah was still very much in charge of social media, but now I was starting to see some posts on the company's Instagram account that made me uneasy. There were memes making fun of public figures, controversial political commentary, and even some borderline offensive jokes. At first, I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure if it was my place, and I didn't want to come off as overly critical. I figured maybe she was just being bold, and the posts weren't that big of a deal. But one day, I was working late, and I received a notification on my phone. It was from one of the company's clients. The notification was a screenshot of a post that Sarah had made earlier that day, and it was not great. The post was a meme making fun of a specific group of people. It was a stereotype, and it was downright offensive. The client was upset, and they were demanding an explanation. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It wasn't just an innocent mistake. It was something that could seriously damage the reputation of the agency. I knew that something needed to be done, but I didn't know who to talk to. The last thing I wanted to do was cause trouble, but at the same time, I couldn't sit back and let something like this go unchecked. I decided to email the HR manager. I didn't mention Sarah's name directly, but I described the post and explained that I was concerned about the tone and content of some of the social media posts. I asked if there were any guidelines or policies in place regarding what was acceptable to post on the company's social media accounts. I tried to keep it as neutral as possible, but I also wanted to make sure someone knew about the issue. The HR manager responded quickly. She thanked me for bringing the issue to her attention and assured me that she would look into it. I was relieved, thinking that the situation would be handled professionally and discreetly. A few hours later, Sarah came by my desk. She was visibly upset. "Did you tell HR about my posts?" she asked, her voice low. I was taken aback. I had no idea how she knew, but I was honest. I just mentioned that I had some concerns about the content. I didn't think it was a big deal, but, well, I guess it was. She looked at me for a long moment before sighing deeply. "You really did that, huh? You had to go and tell them?" I tried to explain myself, but before I could say anything more, she stormed off. The next day, I received an email from HR telling me that Sarah had been let go. Apparently, the company had decided to terminate her employment due to the social media controversy. I was in shock. I hadn't expected that outcome at all. I thought the situation would be handled with a warning or a discussion, not immediate termination. I felt guilty. I hadn't meant for her to lose her job. I just wanted to make sure the company's reputation wasn't at risk. But now, here I was, with a person who had been friendly to me on my first day getting fired because of something I had reported. The worst part was that nobody in the office seemed to think anything of it. Sarah was gone, and life at the agency went on as usual. I couldn't help but wonder how many people had seen her posts and just let them slide. How many of them had ignored it, hoping it would blow over. I felt like I had been the one who had blown the whistle, but at the same time, I knew I had done the right thing. A few months have passed now, and I've settled into my role. But every now and then, I think back to that day. Sarah was a good person, and I never wanted to see her get fired. I wonder if she ever found out that it was my email that had led to her getting let go. I'm not sure if I'd ever be able to apologize for that. But hey, at least I learned a valuable lesson on my first day at the job. Sometimes, a small action can have bigger consequences than you ever expected. TIFU by accidentally starting a fire in my apartment because I tried to impress my crush with my cooking skills. So, to set the stage, I'm a 25-year-old guy who's never been known for my culinary abilities. I can microwave a frozen pizza or throw some cereal in a bowl, but that's the extent of it. I've always been the let's go out to eat guy when hanging with friends. But lately, there's been this girl at work, Sophie. She's smart, funny, and has a laugh that makes me feel like I'm on top of the world when I hear it. Long story short, I've had a massive crush on her for months, but I've never had the guts to tell her. We started chatting more recently, and one day, she mentioned how she loves home-cooked meals. The way she spoke about food was almost poetic, and I thought, this is my chance. I'm going to cook for her and blow her away with my skills. Of course, at this point, I had no idea how to cook anything. But how hard could it be, right? All I needed was to Google a recipe by the ingredients and follow the instructions. What could go wrong? I decided to go with something simple, a pasta dish with a homemade tomato sauce. It sounded sophisticated, but not too complex. I'm sure you can already see where this is going. So, I Googled the recipe, watched a couple of YouTube videos, and felt like I was getting the hang of it. I even bought a bottle of wine to pair with the meal, because that's what adults do, right? I wanted to set the right mood. I was determined to make a good impression. The first part was easy, boiling pasta. I threw it in the pot and let it do its thing. But then things started to go south. I moved on to making the sauce. I had the ingredients laid out: tomatoes, garlic, onions, olive oil, basil, and some seasoning. It was going to be amazing. The recipe said to sauté the garlic and onions in olive oil before adding the tomatoes. Simple enough. I followed the instructions step by step. But I made a rookie mistake. I didn't know how hot the stove was supposed to be. I put the heat on medium-high and threw the garlic and onions into the pan. Everything was fine for about a minute, then it happened. The smell. A burning, pungent odor started filling the kitchen. I looked down at the pan and realized that I had let the garlic and onions burn. Like, blackened and crispy burnt. At this point, I panicked, but I thought, it's okay, I'll just salvage it. It's still early in the process. I grabbed the spatula and started scraping off the burnt bits. But as I did that, I noticed the oil in the pan had started smoking. Like, a lot. Now, I've seen enough cooking shows to know that you shouldn't ignore smoke coming from a pan, but I was in too deep. I couldn't back out now. Sophie was coming over in an hour, and I was determined to pull this off. I added the tomatoes, hoping the sauce would somehow come together. But instead of the comforting simmering I'd seen on TV, the whole thing started to splatter and bubble violently. At this point, I was starting to sweat. I opened the windows, hoping to clear the smoke out of the apartment, but the smell of burnt garlic was only getting stronger. I noticed the smoke detector in the kitchen was blinking, so I quickly tried to turn it off. As I fumbled with the button, I heard a knock at the door. Sophie had arrived early. I was in full-on panic mode. I rushed to the door, trying to hide the disaster I was dealing with. I opened it, trying to act casual. "Hey, Sophie. Welcome," I said, forcing a smile and trying to mask the fact that my apartment now smelled like a campfire. She smiled back, but I could tell something was off. "You okay?" she asked, looking past me toward the kitchen. I glanced back, and my heart dropped. The smoke was thick now, and the kitchen looked like a war zone. There were bits of burnt onion on the counter, and the sauce was still splattering in the pan like some kind of angry beast. "Oh yeah, I'm good," I said, way too enthusiastically. Just, giving the sauce a little extra flavor, you know? It's an experimental dish. Sophie laughed awkwardly, probably sensing that something wasn't right. I didn't know you were such an adventurous cook, she said, stepping into the kitchen. I tried to usher her away from the kitchen. It's all under control, trust me. But of course, that's when the worst thing possible happened. As I reached for the pan to turn off the heat, I knocked over the bottle of wine I had set on the counter. The bottle toppled, hitting the edge of the counter and spilling all over the floor. Red wine started splashing everywhere, and in my panic, I knocked over a cutting board with half-sliced tomatoes. I stood frozen in shock, my mouth dry, unable to process the full scope of the disaster. Sophie looked at me with wide eyes, and then, bless her heart, she tried to lighten the mood. So, do you need any help? She asked, her voice soft. I wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. This wasn't how I imagined our first meal together. Before I could respond, I heard a loud popping sound from the pan. The sauce had started to bubble over, and flames shot up from the pan. Sophie gasped. Oh my God, is that fire? I looked over, and sure enough, flames were dancing across the pan. In my panic, I grabbed a towel and tried to smother the flames, but that only made things worse. The fire grew larger. I screamed, "Fire extinguisher," and bolted toward the hallway. Sophie was right behind me, clearly freaking out. I found the extinguisher, grabbed it, and rushed back to the kitchen, but by the time I got there, the fire had already spread to the nearby cupboard. I aimed the extinguisher and sprayed, watching as the foam erupted and doused the flames. In the end, I was left standing there, heart racing, covered in foam, with a ruined kitchen and a mortified expression on my face. Sophie was standing by the doorway, looking at me like I had just shown her a new side of my personality, one she wasn't sure she could handle. I think maybe we should order pizza, Sophie suggested, her voice calm despite the chaos. We ended up spending the evening at my place, eating takeout pizza and laughing about the absurdity of the situation. She was surprisingly chill about the whole thing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made an absolute fool of myself. Still, we talked for hours, and by the end of the night, she told me that she didn't care about the disaster. She liked me for who I was. It wasn't the culinary masterpiece I had envisioned, but I guess it worked out in its own way. Now, every time I see her, we laugh about my famous fire-starting pasta. I'm just glad she didn't run for the hills that night. TLDR, tried to impress my crush with cooking, set my kitchen on fire, and had to use a fire extinguisher. Still managed to have a decent evening with her, though. TIFU by accidentally offending my girlfriend's parents during a dinner party by talking about my unconventional family history. So, here's the thing. I've been dating my girlfriend, Clara, for about 8 months now. We've had a pretty smooth relationship, nothing too dramatic, no real red flags. We get along well, have fun together, and everything just seemed normal. Until this dinner party, which was going to be my first time meeting her parents. Now, Clara had warned me about how her parents were. They were a little old-fashioned, more traditional, and, in her words, easily offended. She also mentioned that her dad, Greg, was a big fan of good manners and expected people to follow certain etiquette. So, naturally, I spent the entire week trying to prepare myself for the event. I researched proper table manners, looked up some polite conversation starters, and made sure to dress the part. I even went to the extent of rehearsing how to shake hands firmly and smile just the right way. I was ready to make a good impression. Dinner day arrives, and Clara picks me up. She's looking beautiful, of course, and I'm trying to mask my nerves. We drive over to her house, and when we walk in, her parents greet us warmly. Greg, her dad, is a tall, imposing figure. He's wearing a button-up shirt and looks like he might be the type to demand respect just by entering a room. Her mom, Linda, is much softer in her demeanor, shorter, kind of petite, and she's smiling from ear to ear, offering me a glass of wine as soon as I walk in. I can tell she's the more laid-back of the two.
Dinner goes pretty well.
The food is amazing, some kind of roast chicken with mashed potatoes, green beans, and gravy. Clara is sitting beside me, occasionally whispering little comments about her childhood, which helps break the ice. Greg and Linda are friendly, but they're also pretty reserved. I try my best to be charming and attentive. We're discussing basic stuff, work, life, the weather, and I think things are going well. However, I had no idea that I was walking into a minefield. At one point during the meal, Greg asks, "So, what do your parents do?" I thought this was a pretty normal question, so I answered, "Well, my dad is an artist, and my mom runs a small online business. They're both pretty independent people." "An artist, huh?" Greg says, with a raised eyebrow. "That's interesting. And what kind of business does your mom run?" I can tell by the way he's asking that he's curious, maybe even a little skeptical. The conversation isn't going badly, but there's a slight tension in the air, as if he's trying to gauge if I'm worthy of his daughter. I decide to elaborate. "Yeah, my dad's a bit of a free spirit. He's been all over the world, and he's done some pretty unusual things. He actually spent a few years living in a commune in the 70s. It was one of those organic, self-sustaining kinds of places. It was a real hippie deal, you know? Pretty cool stuff, honestly." There's a slight pause at the table. Clara looks at me like I've just said something extremely inappropriate. Her eyes widen, and I can feel my heart start to race as I try to gauge what just happened. Greg, meanwhile, doesn't miss a beat. He says slowly, his eyes narrowing. "A commune, huh? That's unconventional." I feel my face flush. I'm not sure if I've offended him, or if he's just genuinely curious. But I press on, trying to keep the conversation light. "Yeah, it was definitely a different lifestyle. I mean, I wouldn't want to live like that now, but it's definitely part of my dad's history. It shaped a lot of his worldview." I smile awkwardly, hoping I haven't made things weird. Linda, who has been quiet up until now, suddenly speaks up. "That sounds very different," she says, her tone a little more reserved. I imagine that was an interesting environment to grow up in. At this point, Clara is visibly uncomfortable. She's shifting in her seat, clearly trying to signal me to stop talking, but I don't pick up on it. Instead, I continue, thinking I'm making a connection with Greg. "Yeah, it was definitely unique. I mean, there was a lot of meditation and organic food, but also some strange rituals. I remember one summer, they did a whole nature cleanse where everyone fasted for a week. It was pretty intense, but that kind of thing really shaped how I think about the world. It was like all about connection, nature, people, the universe, finding peace in a world that often doesn't have much of it." There's an awkward silence. I suddenly realize that maybe I've gone too far down this rabbit hole. Clara is now rubbing her temples, and Greg's face is completely unreadable. Linda just glances at me as if I've started talking about something completely foreign to her. Greg says, his voice tight. "I don't think I'd be very comfortable with that kind of lifestyle. Seems a bit extreme." I can feel the tension in the room thickening. Clara is practically sinking into her seat, and I can tell I've just completely messed up. I try to salvage the situation. I mean, yeah, it wasn't for everyone, but it was part of my upbringing, and it gave me a lot of unique experiences. Greg shifts in his chair and takes a sip of his wine. "Well, we all have different upbringings, I suppose. I think it's a bit much, though." He chuckles, but it sounds more like a nervous laugh than a genuine one. At this point, I realize I've completely bombed the conversation. Clara's not even looking at me anymore, and Linda is staring down at her plate. The rest of dinner continues, but the mood has shifted. I try to make some small talk with Clara's mom about the food, but the rest of the evening feels like a disaster. Greg barely says another word to me, and Clara, after dinner, pulls me aside in the kitchen. "What the hell were you thinking?" she hisses at me, her face flushed with embarrassment.
What?
"I was just talking about my family," I say defensively. "I didn't think it would be a big deal." Clara glares at me. "You just told my parents that your dad lived in a commune and did weird rituals. They're not exactly into that kind of thing. My dad is literally the type of person who thinks yoga is a cult. You can't talk about stuff like that around them." I can't believe it. I honestly thought I was just being open and honest, but clearly, I completely misjudged the situation. The rest of the night was awkward, and Clara's parents seemed pretty cold toward me. I tried to apologize, but it didn't really seem to help. On the way home, Clara didn't speak a word to me, and the drive was long and uncomfortable. To this day, I don't know how I managed to turn a simple dinner into a complete train wreck. The worst part? Clara hasn't let me forget about it, and she keeps joking that I'm not allowed to talk about my parents at family gatherings ever again. TIFU by being way too honest about my family's unconventional past, and now I'm probably never going to be invited back to Clara's parents' house for dinner. TIFU by trying to impress my date with my cooking skills and ending up in the hospital. This started a few weeks ago when I matched with this beautiful woman on a dating app. Let's call her Sarah. We hit it off right away. She was funny, smart, and had an infectious laugh that I couldn't help but adore. I was eager to meet her in person, so we set up a date for last Saturday. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Now, I'm not exactly a Michelin star chef or anything, but I can hold my own in the kitchen. I can cook the basics: pasta, tacos, stir-fry, that kind of thing. Nothing too fancy. However, after talking to Sarah for a bit, I realized she was passionate about food, especially fine dining. She would go on and on about some fancy restaurants she'd been to or dishes she loved. To be honest, it was impressive, but also a little intimidating. I figured if I could cook something gourmet for our date, it would set me apart from all the other guys she'd been out with. You know, something that would show I was sophisticated and thoughtful. I did a little research. A lot of research. I Googled recipes for hours. I wanted to make a dish that would knock her socks off, something that screamed, "Look at me. I know what I'm doing." After a few deep dives into food blogs, I decided on a classic, beef Wellington. Yeah, I know, beef Wellington. It's known for being one of the hardest dishes to prepare, but I was feeling confident. Plus, I had already picked up a whole beef tenderloin from the butcher. It seemed like the perfect dish to prove that I wasn't some amateur. I spent the next few days obsessing over every detail of the recipe. I even watched a few YouTube videos to make sure I had it down to a science. The plan was to cook the beef Wellington the day of our date, so it would be fresh when she arrived at my apartment. I felt like a culinary master in the making. The day of the date arrived, and I went all out. I had a nice bottle of red wine, set the table with candles, and everything. It was looking like a 5-star experience. I was about 90% done with the Wellington when I realized I'd made a critical mistake. I forgot to get the puff pastry. The most important part. I couldn't believe it. My stomach sank. I had already prepped the beef, the mushroom duxelle, and everything else, but without the puff pastry, it was basically just an expensive piece of beef. I didn't have time to run to the store. I couldn't just show up at the door without something to serve. So I decided to get creative. I went into the fridge and grabbed a few sheets of phyllo dough. It wasn't exactly the same as puff pastry, but it was flaky and could work, right? I thought, it's better than nothing. So, I wrapped the beef in the phyllo dough, crossed my fingers, and shoved it in the oven. While that was baking, I cleaned up a bit, and then, suddenly, I realized I had no idea how to actually serve this thing. I was so focused on the preparation that I hadn't even thought about the presentation. I had no fancy plating or garnishes, so I ran to my pantry and grabbed some store-bought mashed potatoes and some frozen peas. I knew it wasn't gourmet by any means, but it would have to do. At this point, I was starting to panic. I could smell the beef cooking, but I had no idea how it was going to turn out. I was praying to whatever cooking gods existed that it wouldn't be a total disaster. I opened the oven to check on it, and to my horror, the phyllo dough was turning an alarming shade of burnt. I pulled it out quickly, trying not to think about the fact that the whole thing looked like a charred hockey puck. I tried to salvage it by cutting off the burn bits, but it was too late. The beef was well overcooked. Not the medium-rare perfection I was hoping for. It was dry, tough, and frankly unappetizing. I wasn't about to give up now, though. I tossed the wreck of beef Wellington onto the plate, added the peas and mashed potatoes, and took a deep breath. It was time to face the music. Sarah arrived a little early, so I had to act fast. I opened the door and greeted her with a big smile, hoping she wouldn't notice the sinking feeling in my stomach. She complimented the setup, and I was honestly relieved that she seemed impressed with the ambience. We sat down to eat, and I tried to act casual as I placed the plate in front of her. She took her first bite, and I held my breath. For a few seconds, she didn't say anything.
Just chewed slowly.
Then she put her fork down. "Wow," she said, her voice a little flat. "This is interesting." I panicked. My mind raced, and I tried to explain. Yeah, well, I tried a different kind of dough, so it's a bit crispy. And, the beef isn't exactly what I wanted, but I was going for a certain texture. You know? A little rustic? She smiled weakly, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She pushed the plate away a little, and I noticed she hadn't touched the peas or potatoes. At that point, I knew things were bad. So, she said, taking a deep breath. Can I be honest with you? Of course, I said, feeling like I was about to be obliterated. This is one of the worst things I've ever tasted, she said bluntly. I don't want to be rude, but I've had better food in the school cafeteria. I just sat there, completely deflated. I'd made the mistake of thinking I could impress her with food, but all I'd done was show that I had no idea what I was doing. I'm sure she could see the red creeping up my neck, but she tried to lighten the mood by laughing. I appreciate the effort, but maybe we should go grab a burger, she suggested. At that point, I was ready to die of embarrassment, but I tried to laugh it off. We ended up going to a nearby diner, where I tried to salvage some dignity by ordering a burger and fries. The rest of the night was pleasant enough, but I couldn't stop thinking about the disaster I had created. We ended up parting ways after a couple of hours, and she told me she had a good time, but I could tell she wasn't exactly thrilled. The next day, I got a message from her saying she had fun, but that she didn't think we were a match. I wasn't exactly surprised, but I was still disappointed. The worst part? A few days later, I found out that Sarah had posted a picture of the beef Wellington disaster on Instagram with a caption, "When your date tries to impress you with gourmet cooking and almost kills you with burnt phyllo dough." I've never been more embarrassed in my life. At least now, I know I'm better off sticking to pasta and tacos. Never again will I try to impress someone with a fancy dish I can't make. TLDR, tried to impress my date by cooking beef Wellington. Used phyllo dough instead of puff pastry. Ended up with a burnt, overcooked disaster. Date was unimpressed and posted the whole thing on Instagram. Lesson learned. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by accidentally sending a nude to my boss instead of my boyfriend. So, this happened last week, and I'm still cringing every time I think about it. I swear, my brain just shuts off sometimes, and this was definitely one of those times. For some context, I'm a 28-year-old woman working in a corporate office. I have a pretty serious boyfriend, Alex, and we've been together for about a year. I've never had any issues with sending intimate photos to him, though I do tend to double-check everything before sending them. That's just basic precaution, right? Well, not last week. It all started when I was sitting at my desk, pretending to look busy while scrolling through my phone like everyone does, right? My boss, let's call him Mr. Walker, had just left for a meeting, and I had a little break in between some projects. Alex had texted me asking for some, spicy pictures, so I thought, why not? I didn't think much of it and decided to snap a quick selfie. It wasn't anything wild, just something a little sexy, but nothing that I would be embarrassed to show my friends if it came to that. I was in the middle of typing a response to him when I realized that I hadn't sent it yet. I had a few other things on my mind, and before I could refocus, I got an email notification from work. It was from my boss, Mr. Walker. He had forwarded an email to me with the subject line urgent, project updates. So, of course, my mind thought, okay, I need to handle this. My phone had a habit of not showing full email titles unless you tap them, so I just hit reply without thinking too much about it. Now, for the twist, my phone automatically opens up the last text message I had been typing when replying to an email. And guess who I had been texting? Alex. You can see where this is going. I quickly typed out a reply all to Mr. Walker's email and, not realizing the autofill had opened the message I had been sending to my boyfriend, I hit send. What followed was one of the most awkward moments of my entire life. I didn't even realize my mistake at first. I went back to my desk and started working on the project at hand, thinking everything was just fine. That was until a few minutes later when I got a reply back from Mr. Walker. I thought it would be an update on the project we were working on, so I eagerly opened the email to see what was up. The subject line, "Is everything okay?" The body of the email, "I'm not sure this is what you meant to send, but I received this photo when I clicked your response. If you want to discuss this in private, we can set up a meeting later today." I froze. For a good few seconds, I thought my world was about to end. I had no idea what he was talking about until I remembered that I had just sent a photo. The panic hit me like a freight train, and I quickly opened the email I had sent him. The picture. The picture. That stupid picture was there. And I was now 100% sure it was not a professional photo, nor was it something I should be sending to anyone at work. I had sent my boss an intimate selfie, half-dressed, mid-pose, in my bedroom. I didn't even have time to think of a response before my brain started to spiral. I immediately texted Alex, who was equally horrified, though also kind of laughing at how badly I had messed up. He said something like, "Well, at least it was just a selfie and not something worse," which, sure, that could have been worse, but it was still way too much for someone in a position of authority to receive from an employee. And to make matters worse, Mr. Walker was someone I barely knew outside of work. He was in his 40s, married, and had been with the company for over 15 years. I knew I had to apologize, but how do you even do that? How do you explain to your boss that you didn't mean to send him a photo of your half-naked body, but rather you accidentally sent it because your phone opened up the wrong message? It sounded ridiculous and inexcusable, but I had to try. I panicked and tried to come up with something professional, but nothing sounded right. I even Googled how to apologize to your boss for sending the wrong photo, and let me tell you, there is no good advice for this kind of situation. It's just one of those things you have to muddle through. Finally, I decided to take a deep breath and respond to his email, typing, "I sincerely apologize for the unintended photo. That was not intended for you, and was sent in error. Please disregard it, and I can assure you it won't happen again. I understand if you'd like to discuss this further, or if there's anything you need from me regarding the matter." I hit send, cringing as I did so, and waited. The minutes felt like hours. I couldn't concentrate on anything. My hands were shaking. I was waiting for him to either fire me or at least have a word with me. But then, an hour later, I got another email from him. It was much shorter than I expected. It simply said, "No worries. I'll see you in the meeting at 3. That was it. No mention of the photo. No awkward comments. He didn't even ask for clarification. I stared at the email for a while, not sure how to react. Did he not know what to say? Was he pretending it never happened? Or was he just being nice about it to avoid embarrassing me further? Either way, I was left in an uncomfortable limbo. Later that afternoon, I went into the meeting with him, my face red and my stomach in knots. But Mr. Walker treated me like nothing had happened. We had a regular meeting, and the only time he even mentioned anything remotely related to what had occurred was when he casually said, "By the way, I've forwarded some of those project updates to the team. Let's get on with it." And that was that. I'm still not sure what happened or why he didn't bring it up again. Maybe he thought it was some sort of weird office accident that didn't need addressing. Maybe he's just too professional to make a big deal out of it. Either way, I'll be more careful next time I try to send a photo to my boyfriend. And in case you were wondering, I have definitely learned my lesson. Always double-check who you're sending things to. Always. Because one moment of carelessness can lead to a situation you'll never forget. So yeah, that's my TIFU. I'm still mortified. TIFU by accidentally causing a chain of events that led to a complete disaster at my best friend's wedding. So, this all started a few months ago when my best friend, Jessica, asked me to be her maid of honor. I was beyond excited because not only was she my best friend, but she had been there for me through thick and thin. The wedding was scheduled for the first weekend in April, and everything seemed to be falling into place. Her fiancé, Tom, was a good guy, and the whole thing was shaping up to be the event of the year. As the maid of honor, I had some important responsibilities: planning the bachelorette party, helping with the dress fittings, and, of course, making sure everything went smoothly on the big day. Now, to give you some background on me, I'm not exactly the most coordinated person. I'm the type of person who trips over their own feet and tends to knock things over when I'm in a rush. So, naturally, when Jessica asked me to be in charge of the wedding day timeline, I should have known better than to accept. But I couldn't say no to her, and I convinced myself that I could handle it.
How hard could it be, right?
I spent weeks organizing everything, coordinating with the vendors, and making sure the timeline was locked down to the minute. I was feeling pretty confident as we approached the wedding day. That confidence was about to be shattered into a million pieces. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I was up at the crack of dawn to help Jessica get ready. The bridal suite was buzzing with excitement. Hair and makeup artists were working their magic, and I was running around like a chicken with its head cut off trying to keep everything in order. The first mistake I made was underestimating how much time we would need. I'd planned everything down to the minute, and I thought we'd be finished early, but of course, things didn't go according to plan. Jessica's dress was taking longer than expected to get into. The makeup artist had to redo Jessica's lipstick 3 times, and the bridesmaids were getting their dresses adjusted last minute. I should have known that nothing ever goes perfectly, but I was too determined to stick to the schedule I had meticulously crafted. I kept checking the clock every few minutes, panicking because we were already running behind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we were ready to head to the venue. But then came the second mistake. I forgot to double-check the transportation. I had arranged for a shuttle to take all of us to the venue, but when I called to confirm the time, I realized I had messed up the reservation. The shuttle wasn't going to arrive for another 30 minutes, and we couldn't afford to wait that long. So, in a panic, I called an Uber for Jessica and the bridesmaids. The driver said he'd be there in 10 minutes, but of course, it took much longer than that. By the time we got to the venue, we were over an hour late. This is where the real disaster began. We arrived to find that the ceremony had already started. The guests were seated, and the music was playing. I rushed Jessica to the dressing room so she could quickly slip into her dress, while I tried to figure out how to deal with the mess I had created. The wedding coordinator, a woman named Karen, was not happy. She had been waiting for us, and I could tell she was seething with frustration. I tried to apologize, but she wasn't having it. She informed me that the ceremony had already begun and that we'd missed the allotted time for the procession. I was mortified. I had just ruined the most important part of Jessica's big day. But there was nothing I could do except try to salvage the situation. Jessica, to her credit, was surprisingly calm about the whole thing. She told me it was fine and that we could at least make it to the reception. But deep down, I knew I had messed up beyond repair. As we entered the reception, I was hoping to blend into the background and not draw any attention to myself. I should have just stayed quiet and let the evening unfold, but my nerves were getting the best of me. I went to the bar to grab a drink and was approached by one of the groomsmen, Mark. Mark and I had been friends for years, but we hadn't spoken much in recent months. He seemed like he was in good spirits, so I struck up a conversation with him to try to ease the tension I was feeling. Now, this is where things took a really bad turn. Mark, in his infinite wisdom, suggested we go to the back of the venue to relax for a bit. I didn't see the harm in it. He was just a friend, and I assumed he was trying to help me take my mind off everything. But what happened next was something I'll never forget. As we were chatting in the back room, we ended up having a few too many drinks, and I got a little too comfortable. My judgment was completely clouded by the alcohol, and I ended up kissing Mark. To make matters worse, we were caught by none other than Jessica's mother, who happened to be walking by the room at that exact moment. She was horrified. Her face turned pale, and she stormed off without saying a word. I was in full-blown panic mode at this point. I had just ruined the wedding even further by making out with one of the groomsmen in the middle of the reception. I quickly pulled myself together and rushed back to the main area, hoping that no one else had noticed what had just happened. But of course, Jessica's mother was not going to let this go. She pulled Jessica aside and whispered something in her ear. Jessica's face dropped, and I could see that she was absolutely devastated. She came up to me, eyes full of tears, and asked if it was true. I, of course, couldn't deny it. I apologized profusely, but nothing I said seemed to make things better. Jessica was heartbroken. Her wedding was already a mess, and now her maid of honor had completely screwed things up. The rest of the night was a blur. Jessica barely spoke to me, and Tom, her fiancé, gave me the cold shoulder. The reception went on, but the tension in the air was palpable. By the end of the night, I was utterly ashamed of myself. Not only had I messed up the wedding timeline, but I had also ruined my relationship with Jessica. She and I had been through everything together, and now I had betrayed her in the worst way possible. After the wedding, Jessica and I didn't speak for several weeks. I gave her space, knowing I had hurt her deeply. Eventually, she reached out, and while we didn't talk much about the wedding, she forgave me. She said it would take time to heal, but we'd get through it. We're still friends, but things have definitely changed. That wedding, which was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life, will forever be remembered as the day I screwed everything up. Looking back, I still can't believe how badly I messed up. If I had just kept my cool, followed the timeline, and not let my nerves get the best of me, maybe it wouldn't have been such a disaster. But in the end, I learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, being a maid of honor is more responsibility than you can handle. And sometimes, one mistake can change everything. TIFU by pretending to be fluent in Spanish to impress my girlfriend's family. So this happened a few months ago, but the emotional damage is fresh enough that I still wake up in a cold sweat sometimes. To set the scene, I'm a 28-year-old guy who met my girlfriend, Lucia, about a year ago. She's second-generation Mexican-American, born and raised in California. I'm from Ohio. She's smart, funny, gorgeous, and way out of my league. Early on, she told me her family mostly spoke Spanish at home, especially her abuela, who doesn't speak much English. I, trying to be cool and supportive, told her I loved languages and had studied Spanish for years. This was a bit of a stretch. I took 3 years in high school and dropped it as soon as I got to college. My Spanish is basically a mix of Duolingo Level 1 and the Taco Bell menu. But Lucia was so impressed. She kept telling me how refreshing it was to meet someone who respected her culture. I had zero clue what I was setting myself up for. Fast forward to the big moment. Lucia invites me to a weekend family gathering, her cousin's birthday party. She tells me it's mostly immediate and extended family, lots of food, music, and everyone's really friendly. Then she drops the bomb. Everyone's excited to hear you speak Spanish. Apparently, she'd told them I was fluent. I smiled like an idiot and said, "Can't wait." So, I panic study. I download every Spanish app one can find, binge watch Narcos, with subtitles, and read children's books in Spanish. I convince myself I'll be okay if I just nod a lot, smile, and throw in the occasional sí, claro. We arrive, and I get the warmest welcome ever. Her family is amazing, hugging me, feeding me, offering me tequila before noon. Then comes abuela, tiny, serious, with the eyes of someone who's seen through every lie since the Spanish Inquisition. She greets me in rapid-fire Spanish and then waits, expectantly. I panic. I say, "Estoy muy emocionado para el cumpleaños fiesta." She blinks. Lucia is looking at me like I just passed a secret test. Her aunt claps and says something like, "Que bien chico." And then it begins. People swarm me, asking questions. One uncle starts talking to me about Mexican politics. Someone else is ranting about the Mexican soccer team's last game. I nod, say sí when I think it's appropriate, laugh when others laugh, and repeat claro like it's a magic spell. It works for about 20 minutes. Then abuela decides I should say grace before dinner. In Spanish, Lucia gives me an encouraging smile, completely unaware that I'm on the verge of throwing up into the guacamole. I stand up. I panic pray. I say something like, "Gracias por el comida. Y por la familia. Gracias por el pollo y el amor y la tortilla y es muy importante. Gracias todos los días. Amen." There's a silence. Then a laugh. Then the whole table erupts. Someone starts clapping. Lucia looks like she's going to cry, from pride or shame, unclear. I sit down, red-faced, and Lucia leans over and whispers, "That was so sweet." I survived dinner. Barely. But my luck runs out during a game of loteria, Mexican bingo. I'm sitting next to abuela, and she keeps saying something to me every time a card is called. I don't understand, but I keep nodding like an idiot. Eventually, she says something and hands me her card. Now, my Spanish is trash, but I know she basically said, "Mark this for me." So I take her pencil, and in what I believed was an act of kindness, I mark off all the spots on her card.
Every
Single.
one.
She stares at it, then at me, then says something I don't catch. Lucia hears and goes pale. "Did you mark every spot?" she asks. "Yeah, I thought that was the... You just made Abuela lose on purpose." She was about to win. Apparently, I had helped her lose the final round of a very competitive family tradition where the winner gets a hand-painted wooden rooster that has been passed down for generations. The mood shifts. The music seems quieter. Abuela is now glaring at me like I kicked her dog and insulted her cooking. Later that evening, I try to redeem myself by helping in the kitchen. I offer to help wash dishes, and Lucia's mom, trying to be nice, says in Spanish something like, "You're so sweet, but you're our guest. You should relax." And I, trying to be cute, reply, "No, I'm the woman of the house." What I meant to say was, "I'll help like the lady of the house," or something charming. But what I actually said, according to Lucia, was closer to "I am the woman now." Cue more stares. More confusion. Someone coughs to hide a laugh. Abuela mutters a prayer. Lucia finally pulls me aside and says, "Hey, I need to ask, are you actually fluent?" And I, defeated and soaking in shame like a tortilla in mole sauce, confess everything. She laughs. Hard. Too hard. Then says, "Okay, we need to tell them before you accidentally propose to my uncle or declare war on Brazil." She translates my confession to her family, and thankfully, most of them laugh it off. Abuela just stares, then says something like, "At least he tried," which I'm told is the highest praise she's given in 10 years. Lucia's still with me. I'm now taking actual Spanish lessons, partly because I want to connect with her family, and partly because I need revenge during the next loteria.
But yeah,
that's how I faked fluency in Spanish, emotionally damaged a matriarch, and almost destroyed a family heirloom rooster. TIFU by taking my girlfriend to a family reunion and accidentally outing my cousin's secret life. So this happened a few weeks ago, and I've only just now gathered enough emotional stability to write it down. To preface this, I love my girlfriend. She's amazing. Smart, funny, and has a photographic memory that, in most situations, is a party trick. In this one, it was a nuclear warhead. Every year, my extended family gets together for a reunion that's part backyard barbecue, part sleepover, part wine-drunk therapy session. It's a whole weekend ordeal. My family is massive. I'm talking cousins of cousins, people I haven't seen since I was 9, and great-aunts who still call me by my baby nickname. This year was the first time I brought my girlfriend, Maddie. She was excited, a little nervous, and had spent the last 2 weeks doing the sweetest thing imaginable, trying to memorize who's who from a giant family tree I drew for her. I told her not to worry. Just smile, be yourself, and don't take Uncle Ray's moonshine. Famous last words. The first night was casual. Introductions, burgers, lawn chairs, uncles comparing grills. Maddie was a hit. Everyone loved her. She was charming and asked questions and remembered obscure things like, "Oh, you're the one who breeds hedgehogs, right?" To my second cousin Shelley. That sort of thing. I basked in her glow, sipping a beer, thinking life was perfect. Then came the real screw-up. The next day, we're all in the main backyard, close to 80 people now, and someone brings out the family trivia game. This was new. Apparently, my cousin Joey's new wife had created this fun bonding activity, where everyone submitted weird or funny facts about themselves anonymously, and we'd guess who it was about. Cool idea, I thought. What could possibly go wrong? Round after round, Maddie was unstoppable. Someone used to be a rodeo clown? That's Aunt Liz. And she'd be right. Someone was banned from Canada for reasons unknown? Uncle Tony. Nailed it. She was starting to get cocky, and I was just watching in awe. Then came the card that detonated the whole damn family. Joey's wife reads, "This person works as a professional dominatrix on weekends in a different city and has never told their family." Nervous laughter. Awkward shuffling. Someone jokes, "Sounds like a Netflix show." Maddie, without missing a beat, blurts out, asterisk. Oh, that's Cassandra.
Your cousin, right?
From your mom's side? Asterisk. Silence. Time stopped. Birds stopped chirping. The grill sizzled in protest. Cassandra, my 28-year-old cousin who had been sitting a few feet away with her plate of potato salad, turned the color of a raw steak. Her fork froze midair. Her mom, my Aunt Diane, dropped her wine glass. Her dad looked like he'd just been told the earth was flat, and we were the ones flying it. Maddie, blissfully unaware of what she'd just done, grinned. She's based out of Denver, right? I remember because I saw her photos on that dominatrix-themed Instagram account when I was researching for a costume party. She had the same tattoo as Cassandra, the little snake on her wrist. Super distinctive. I wanted the earth to swallow me whole. I was staring directly at my beer can, trying to astral project into it. Cassandra stood up, quietly put her plate down, and walked inside the house without saying a word. Her mom followed, hissing something that sounded like Latin for, "You've defiled our bloodline." Someone awkwardly laughed. A child cried. I think a squirrel even dropped a nut out of sheer shock. It was chaos. People were murmuring, trying to figure out if it was a joke. Joey's wife looked like she was regretting every decision that led her to this moment. Uncle Ray said, "I need that moonshine now," and vanished. I turned to Maddie and whispered, "Babe, I don't think she wanted anyone to know that." She blinked. Wait, it was true? Reader, she wasn't joking. She just connected dots like a goddamn FBI profiler, not even realizing what kind of live grenade she'd just thrown into the family circle. That night, the reunion ended early. Like early. My mom came up to me and said, "I think it's best if you guys head out tonight." Which, in family code, means leave now before Aunt Diane puts a hex on your descendants. Cassandra hasn't replied to any family messages since. There are rumors she moved back to Denver early. The group chat has been dead silent except for Aunt Liz sending a single gif of a cat knocking over a glass of wine. Maddie feels horrible. She apologized profusely to me, to my mom, even tried messaging Cassandra, no reply. She didn't mean to out anyone. She just thought it was a wild but easily guessable fact and forgot it was, a secret. As for me, I'm now known as the guy who brought Sherlock Holmes to a family game night and blew up someone's double life. Moral of the story: if your girlfriend is the Rain Man of family secrets, maybe leave her home when playing truth-based games. Or, at the very least, screen the trivia questions like your life depends on it. Because sometimes, knowledge isn't power. It's just a bomb with perfect aim. To fool by pretending to be my twin brother for a date and accidentally getting engaged. Okay, let me preface this by saying I didn't plan to deceive anyone. I didn't wake up that morning and think, yeah, today feels like a great day to impersonate my identical twin and ruin a bunch of lives. It just kind of spiraled. So here's the setup. I'm Jake. My twin brother is Ryan. We're identical twins, like carbon copy, switch places, and our own mother can't tell identical. It's been our thing since kindergarten. He's always been the more confident one, the one who jumps into stuff. I'm quieter, more analytical. Where Ryan dates like he's in a montage, I've basically turned dating into a waiting game I'm losing. Last week, Ryan calls me in a panic. He's got this date lined up with a girl he met online, Emma. Apparently, they've been talking for weeks, lots of texts, phone calls, even some late-night video chats. But now, he's double-booked. He's got some last-minute work thing he can't bail on, and he's afraid Emma will ghost him if he cancels last minute. Just go and be me for like an hour, he says. Keep it vague, keep it light, order food, compliment her earrings, whatever. I'll call with an emergency, and you leave.
Smooth.
Painless. I said no. Repeatedly. I said it was stupid. He begged. I cracked. So I show up at the restaurant, dressed like Ryan, hairstyled like his, wearing his watch, his leather jacket. It felt stupid. I kept thinking someone would yell fraud as soon as I sat down. Then Emma walked in. She was stunning, but not in the intimidating way. More like, she walked in like she belonged wherever she went. Confident, self-aware, and when she smiled at me, it felt like someone turned the volume down on the world. I forgot my own name for a second, let alone Ryan's. We hit it off. Like, really hit it off. She was funny, quick, made fun of the waiter with me in a way that wasn't mean but just clever. We joked about weird Tinder profiles, talked about our favorite books, shared embarrassing pet stories. One drink turned into three. Dinner into dessert. I forgot about the fake emergency call. I forgot I was pretending to be someone else. I just was, for the first time in forever, I felt like I was being seen, even if it was under the wrong name. Then she leaned in and kissed me. I panicked. I froze for half a second, but then I kissed her back. And I swear, my conscience was screaming at me like a referee at a cheating scandal, but I didn't stop. I didn't want to. We walked outside, still laughing, a little tipsy, and she asked if I wanted to come over and watch the rest of the movie we'd joked about over dinner. My mouth said yes before my brain even voted. We didn't sleep together, just cuddled on her couch under a blanket, watching some old rom-com neither of us could focus on. I was in this weird bubble of happiness and dread. I left around 2 a.m. and drove home replaying the whole thing in my head. Ryan was waiting up. He'd already seen my texts about how I was staying longer than expected. He raised an eyebrow.
Dude.
What the hell? I told him everything. He laughed at first, then stopped when he realized how far I'd let it go. You kissed her? Jake, are you insane? Look, I said. I didn't plan it. But we connected. Like, really connected. I haven't felt like that with anyone in maybe, ever. He just shook his head. You need to tell her the truth.
Today.
Before this turns into something way worse. I agreed. 100%. I even drafted a text a dozen times the next morning. But I didn't send it. Instead, we kept texting. We went on another date 2 days later. Then another. The longer I waited, the harder it got. I was falling for her, but under false pretenses. Every time she called me Ryan, I felt like I was stealing something. But then she'd laugh at one of my stupid jokes, and I'd just stay in a lie. It all came crashing down last night. We were at this cozy bar she liked, and after a couple drinks, she looked at me all serious and said, Ryan, I've never felt like this before. I think I love you. I panicked. I just stared at her, not breathing. And then she pulled out a ring box. A ring box. Apparently, she'd been planning it for a few days. Said she knew it was unconventional, but when you know, you know. She got down on one knee, in front of the entire bar. I blacked out for a second. All I remember is her eyes, so full of hope, and 100 strangers watching us like a live rom-com. I said yes.
I don't know why.
I can't explain it. Some part of me thought I could fix it later. Some other part was screaming idiot, while clapping like an excited seal. The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone sent over champagne. People were clapping me on the back, toasting us. I was engaged to someone who didn't even know my real name. So now I'm sitting here in my apartment, staring at a ring I didn't buy, for a girl who loves a version of me that doesn't exist. Ryan hasn't spoken to me since I told him. Emma is blowing up my phone with cute selfies and ideas for our wedding. And I'm this close to ruining 3 lives because I couldn't say no to one tiny favor. TIFU by getting my neighbor arrested because of a sandwich. I never thought a turkey sandwich would lead to a felony arrest, a neighborhood feud, and me questioning every decision I've ever made involving condiments. But here we are. So I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in a suburban area where everyone pretends to be friendlier than they actually are. The kind of place where people wave at each other from the mailbox but secretly judge your lawn height. I moved in about 2 years ago. I'm single, early 30s, work from home as a freelance designer, and generally try to avoid drama like the plague. But apparently, drama does not care how conflict-averse you are when deli meat is involved. Let me introduce the key players in this suburban horror show. There's me. There's Greg, my across-the-street neighbor, in his late 40s, owns a pool cleaning business, and has an obsession with lawn ornaments shaped like animals. His yard looks like a Target garden aisle exploded. Then there's his wife, Nancy, always in velour tracksuits, always sipping white wine out of an insulated tumbler the size of a toddler. And then there's their 19-year-old son, Kyle.
Kyle.
The human monster energy can. Kyle doesn't do much except work part-time at a vape shop, blast EDM at 2 a.m., and train for MMA fights that don't exist. It started innocently. On a random Tuesday afternoon, I made myself a turkey sandwich. Normal stuff: sourdough bread, mayo, mustard, lettuce, tomato, pickles, turkey, a slice of peppered jack cheese. I took a bite, and it was divine. One of those moments where your taste buds hold hands and do the wave. I was in a good mood, so I decided to eat outside on my little patio. While I'm halfway through the sandwich, Greg walks by with his yappy little Pomeranian named Snickers. He stops, we do the neighborly nod thing, and he says, "That smells good." "What is it?" I jokingly reply, "Just the greatest turkey sandwich ever constructed by man." Greg laughs, makes a dad joke about opening a sandwich shop, and walks off. That's it. Or so I thought. Fast forward to 2 days later. I'm working, and I hear the doorbell ring. I open it, and it's Kyle. Hoodie up, twitchy, holding what looks like a crumpled fast food bag. "Yo," he says. "My dad said you make good sandwiches?" I blink. I guess. I made one 2 days ago." "Yeah," he says. "Can I buy one?" At this point, I thought he was kidding. So I laughed. Big mistake. He got dead serious and said, "I'm not playing." I got $20. "Make me that turkey joint you had." Now, I should have said no. I should have closed the door, locked it, and moved on with my life. But there was something so hilariously bizarre about the situation that I said, "Fine, but you're not paying me. It's just a sandwich." He lights up. "Hell yeah, bro." I go inside, make the same sandwich, and hand it to him in some wax paper. He takes one bite, groans like he's having a religious experience, and walks away without another word. This should have been the end. But it was just the beginning. 3 days later, Nancy shows up at my door. Velour, wine tumbler, big sunglasses. "Are you the one selling sandwiches to my son?" I clarify that I gave him one, just one, and it was free.
She sips.
"Well, now he won't stop talking about your turkey masterpiece, and he's been pestering me to buy sandwich ingredients. He hasn't eaten Hot Pockets in 3 days. Do you have any idea what that does to a mother's nerves?" I'm stunned, stammer some apology, and she waves me off. "Just keep your sandwiches to yourself, okay?" I agree. And for the next week, peace returns. Until I find a note taped to my door. "Yo, bro. I need another hit. Same setup. Extra pickles." "'Kay." I laugh, toss the note, and don't respond. Then things start going missing from my porch. A bag of groceries I had delivered. A set of Bluetooth speakers I ordered. Even a freaking rotisserie chicken.
Gone.
I check my security cam. And sure enough, there's Kyle, hoodie up, doing shady porch raids at 3 a.m. like a raccoon with gym memberships. So, I do what any responsible adult does.
I go talk to Greg.
I show him the footage, calmly explain what's been happening, and ask if he can handle it privately before I call the cops. Greg stares at the footage for a full minute, goes red in the face, mutters "that little shit," and storms off. The next day, Kyle comes to my door with a black eye and a trash bag of random items. "I'm not allowed to talk to you anymore," he mumbles, drops the bag, and leaves. Again, I think it's over.
But oh no.
2 weeks later, I get a knock on the door. 2 police officers. They ask me if I've been distributing unauthorized consumables in the neighborhood. I think I'm being punked. Turns out, Nancy called the cops on me, claiming I was lacing sandwiches with drugs and illegally selling food without a license, which led to an investigation. After a whole mess of awkward conversations, a search of my kitchen, and me offering them both sandwiches just to prove a point, they realize it's a ridiculous misunderstanding. But it doesn't end there. While they're here, they run the footage I gave Greg again to verify Kyle's identity. Turns out Kyle is also a suspect in a string of petty thefts from porches across the neighborhood. Not just mine. Greg never turned the footage in, but I had backed it up. So now Kyle's being investigated for multiple thefts, and because he's technically an adult, he's facing actual charges. I didn't want this. Greg and Nancy now fully blame me for destroying their family. Greg won't wave at me anymore. Nancy glares at me like I skinned her dog. And Kyle? Kyle left a note in my mailbox. All you had to do was make me a sandwich. I've never been a great cook, but I can usually manage to get by. In fact, I'd say I'm an expert at basic things: cereal, microwave pizza, scrambled eggs. Nothing too complicated. But one night, I decided to change things up. I wanted to impress my roommate, who's a much better cook than I am. She makes things like gourmet pasta, roasted vegetables, and those fancy-looking salads with the weirdly expensive cheeses. I've always been kind of embarrassed by my cooking skills, so I thought maybe this was my chance to finally step up my game. After watching a few YouTube videos on how to make spaghetti from scratch, spoiler, it's not as easy as it looks, I decided to try making an actual dinner. It was going to be spaghetti with a meat sauce. Nothing too fancy, but it felt like a good start. I had a package of ground beef in the fridge, a box of spaghetti, and a jar of tomato sauce. Easy enough, right? Well, that's what I thought. The first step was to cook the ground beef. I grabbed a frying pan, tossed it onto the stove, and cranked the heat up. I didn't think to check if the pan was properly preheated or if I should have added oil. So, naturally, the beef started sticking to the pan right away. I should have just waited for the pan to heat up, but I was impatient. My thought process was, heat it up fast, get it done fast. So, I started stirring the beef like a maniac, hoping it would separate and cook through. While I was stirring, I noticed the smell of something burning. It wasn't overwhelming, just a little smoky. I figure it was probably the fat from the beef burning off or something. I didn't think much of it. Then the smoke started to get thicker. I turned my head to look around the kitchen and realized there was a thin haze of smoke filling the air. At that point, I should have stopped and checked what was happening, but I panicked. I turned the stove's heat down, but the damage was done. The beef was sticking to the pan, and it looked like it was burning in places. Still, I was determined to salvage this meal, so I moved forward with my master plan. I moved the pan off the stove to the counter to try and salvage the meat, but as I picked it up, I accidentally knocked over a container of olive oil that was sitting next to the stove. It splashed everywhere, adding even more fuel to the fire, literally. My mistake hadn't just ruined my beef. It was now making the kitchen smell like an overcooked disaster zone. I grabbed the spatula, trying to stir the oil and meat in the pan, but when I lifted it up to give it another go, I saw the flame. There was a small, steady flame licking up from the burner. Panic hit me immediately. I froze for a moment, wondering if I was hallucinating. Was this really happening? Was my cooking disaster now turning into an actual fire? My brain scrambled for what to do next, but everything seemed like the wrong choice. Do I turn the burner off? Do I grab the pan and toss it into the sink? Do I throw water on it? I knew that was a terrible idea, but my brain wasn't functioning at its highest level. Instead, I just grabbed the pan with the flame still going and hurriedly moved it to the sink, trying to put out the flame with the cool water in the sink. Bad move. The water hitting the hot pan created an even bigger, more intense flare-up. It felt like a fireball for a brief second. At this point, I was in full-on panic mode. I started running around the kitchen like a madman, looking for anything that could help. A towel?
No.
A fire extinguisher? I didn't own one. Big mistake. I finally grabbed my phone and called 911, trembling as I spoke to the operator. The person on the other end was calm, but I wasn't. I was barely coherent. Help. I've set my kitchen on fire. It's bad. Please send someone, please. The operator asked for my address and gave me instructions to stay on the line. I was in the middle of trying to figure out what the hell to do when I noticed the sound. It was the fire alarm. And it wasn't just a faint beep. No, this thing was screaming at me. It was like the loudest, most annoying sound I had ever heard in my life, echoing through the whole apartment. The alarm was so loud that I could barely hear myself think. I was sweating. My heart was pounding. I could feel the panic rising as I glanced around the kitchen. The smoke had completely filled the room. I didn't know how I had let it get this far. The fire trucks arrived quickly, and I could hear the sirens as they pulled up outside the building. At this point, my roommate had come running out of her room to see what the hell was going on. I could tell by the look on her face that she thought I had somehow caused a major disaster, because, well, I had. She was both furious and scared, but mostly just stunned at the fire department showing up to deal with a kitchen fire that was probably just a small grease fire that I had made exponentially worse. The firemen came in, looking unimpressed but calm, as they assessed the situation. One of them asked if I had tried to put it out with water, and I nodded sheepishly. He sighed and gently explained that I shouldn't have done that because it can make the fire worse, but at least I hadn't caused a full-blown kitchen inferno. They quickly turned off the stove and started venting the kitchen, opening windows and doors to let the smoke out. In the aftermath, the firemen gave me a stern lecture about fire safety and made me promise to never use water to put out a grease fire again. They even gave me a pamphlet on fire prevention. Honestly, at that point, I was too embarrassed to even argue. I apologized repeatedly and tried to make jokes to lighten the mood, but no one was really having it. My roommate was pissed, understandably. She spent the next hour airing out the apartment and complaining about how we both might have died because I couldn't manage to cook a simple meal. As for the spaghetti, well, it never made it to the table. I ended up ordering takeout, and after all that drama, it didn't even taste that good. I'll stick to my cereal for now. Thank you very much. Lesson learned. If you're going to try cooking, don't treat your kitchen like an experiment gone wrong. And for the love of God, buy a fire extinguisher before you start. Oh, and maybe don't mess with the heat if you don't know what you're doing. Needless to say, my roommate is still talking about this incident. Every time I try to cook now, she asks, "So, should I call the fire department first?" TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a simple, homemade dinner and nearly burning my house down. I'm not usually the kind of person who tries to go overboard, but when it comes to impressing a girl, I've been known to occasionally go a little extra. Let me explain. A little over a month ago, I met this amazing girl, Sarah, at a coffee shop. She's one of those people who instantly makes you feel comfortable, and within the first 10 minutes of talking, we were laughing about the dumbest things. As the weeks went on, we started hanging out more and more, and it became clear we were both interested in each other. We'd text every day, talk about our favorite movies, music, and everything in between. I knew I had to do something special for her to show her I was serious about this. One evening, Sarah mentioned that she was into cooking, especially making dinner for friends. She casually said, "I've always wanted to have someone cook me a nice meal for once." As soon as I heard that, I immediately thought to myself, this is my chance. I decided I would cook her a dinner that would knock her socks off. Now, let me be clear. I'm not a chef. I can make ramen, scrambled eggs, and frozen pizza. That's about the extent of my culinary skills. But the idea of cooking a full-fledged meal for Sarah filled me with determination. I did some quick Google searches to figure out what a simple, homemade meal could be. After some thought, I settled on making pasta with homemade Alfredo sauce, garlic bread, and a simple salad.
How hard could it be?
I spent the next few days in preparation, researching recipes and watching YouTube videos on how to make Alfredo sauce from scratch. I read several articles and watched tutorials on how to chop garlic properly, how to make the perfect salad dressing, and how to make sure the pasta was cooked just right. I had all the ingredients: fettuccine, butter, cream, parmesan, garlic, bread, lettuce, everything. This was going to be perfect. The day of the dinner, I told Sarah I was making dinner at my place and that I'd love for her to come over. She was excited and said she'd be there around 7 p.m. I had about 3 hours to prep everything, which was plenty of time, right? I started by making the garlic bread. I figured it would be simple, just butter, garlic, and bread. How could you mess that up? Well, I didn't factor in my tendency to get distracted. I put the bread in the oven and set the timer for 10 minutes. I decided to work on the pasta while it baked. The sauce seemed like it would be the trickiest part, so I thought I'd get that started right away. I started heating butter in a pan, but for some reason, the butter didn't melt as quickly as I had expected. I turned up the heat a little and threw in the minced garlic. In my mind, I was doing everything by the book. Then, I realized I didn't have a measuring cup for the heavy cream, so I guessed the amount. I poured it in, not realizing I'd accidentally grabbed the wrong kind of cream. I'd gotten half and half instead of full cream, which would later come back to bite me. With the sauce slowly coming together, I thought I'd check on the garlic bread. When I opened the oven, I immediately smelled something burning. I had left the bread in for way too long. The edges were crispier than I would have liked, but I could salvage it, I thought. I pulled the bread out, and even though it looked more like charcoal than golden brown, I convinced myself that maybe it would taste fine. Sarah was a good sport, right? She wouldn't judge me for slightly crispy garlic bread, right? Now, onto the pasta. I was feeling confident. The water was boiling, and I dropped the fettuccine in. I had read that you should stir the pasta constantly for the first minute to keep it from sticking. Naturally, I set a timer and left to check on the garlic bread again. Big mistake. I heard the timer go off, but instead of rushing back, I took a moment to check my phone for messages. And by the time I returned to the kitchen, the water had boiled over, and pasta was all over the stove.
Panic set in.
I quickly turned off the stove, grabbed the strainer, and tried to salvage whatever is left of the pasta. As I did, I realized I hadn't added enough salt to the water, which I had read was a huge mistake. I tried to salvage the pasta by throwing it back into the pot with the sauce, hoping it would work out. Spoiler alert, it didn't. At this point, the sauce was starting to separate, and the cream wasn't behaving the way it should have. It had turned into a lumpy, curdled mess. I was still determined to make this work, so I added more butter and more cheese, hoping to salvage it. It was a disaster, but I didn't have time to fix it. Sarah would be there any minute. Then came the final blow. As I was arranging the salad, I accidentally knocked the bowl off the counter. It shattered everywhere. Glass, lettuce, cucumbers, and dressing splattered all over the floor. I froze for a moment. The dinner that I had spent all this time preparing was falling apart, quite literally. At that point, I was convinced Sarah was going to walk in and immediately turn around and leave. With my heart racing, I quickly started cleaning up the mess, but it was too late. I heard a knock at the door. I opened it, and there she was, standing there with a bottle of wine in hand, smiling like she was about to walk into a five-star restaurant. "Hey, sorry I'm a little early," she said, looking past me at the chaotic state of my kitchen. My stomach dropped. I invited her in, and she took a look at the kitchen. I tried to smile, but it was more of a nervous grimace. I had a bit of a situation in here," I said, gesturing to the disaster zone. "But it's still gonna be good. I swear." I led her to the table, where I had set up the plates, but the whole thing looked more like a crime scene than a dinner. She took a bite of the pasta, and to my surprise, she didn't say anything bad about it. She was actually kind enough to keep her face neutral. But when she bit into the garlic bread, she had to hide a wince. After a couple of awkward minutes, Sarah looked up and said, "I appreciate the effort, but maybe next time we can just go out to eat instead?" And that's how I ended up trying to impress my crush with a dinner that nearly turned into an absolute catastrophe. I learned a valuable lesson that night. Sometimes, it's better to stick to what you know and not try to impress someone with a skill you don't have yet. But hey, at least Sarah and I are still friends, and I'm sure we'll laugh about this for years to come. Maybe next time, I'll just stick with ordering pizza. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.